Every proxy provider puts a big shiny number on their homepage. 72 million EPs, 10 million residential proxies access our pool of 50 million, sometimes phrased like it's the population of a small country. It sits right next to the price tag, formatted to look exactly like the thing you're actually buying when you hand over your card. It isn't. It's a headline written to make you stop scrolling and reach for your wallet, not to describe what happens when your scraper makes a request through that network tonight. I run proxy infrastructure for a living, on both sides of it. I sell access to it. And I also run my own scraping jobs against it every single day. So I'm not reading any of this off a spec sheet somewhere. I'm the one watching the dashboards at 2 in the morning when a job starts failing. I've spent enough hours staring at live traffic graphs to know there's a genuinely huge gap between the number on a provider's pricing page and the number of IPs actually doing clean, useful work for a customer right now. That gap is what this video is actually about. So here's what that headline number is actually measuring. It's a count of how many IPs a provider has ever seen pass through their network across its entire history, or in some cases, how many are theoretically reachable through a partner SDK at any given moment. What it does not tell you is how many of those IPs are online right now, tonight, this second. It doesn't tell you how many are usable from the country you're targeting, or how many are already burned on the sites you actually care about. It doesn't tell you whether any of them will still be alive next week. Those are the numbers that decide whether your scrape runs clean, and the homepage figure barely touches any of them. Residential and mobile proxy networks are built on top of ordinary consumer devices running a small piece of software, an SDK, usually bundled quietly inside a free app, a free VPN, or a browser extension somebody installed to save a few dollars. Every device that has ever installed that SDK and connected even once gets added permanently to the total count. Picture a phone that installed the app 18 months ago, got deleted a week later, and hasn't been seen on the network since. That phone is still sitting inside that lifetime total for most providers, quietly padding the number on the homepage. Pulling dead entries like that out of a lifetime count would make the number smaller, and providers know smaller numbers don't sell nearly as well on a pricing page next to a competitor's bigger one. So here's what that looks like in practice on the buyer's side. A provider advertises 50 million IPs. Run the math on realistic churn rates for consumer apps and free VPNs, and the actual number of those devices online and reachable on any given night might be a few 100,000, sometimes less, depending on the hour and the region you need. Data center pools get counted in a completely different way, but the inflation logic ends up in the same place. A provider might lease large IP blocks across several data centers and then simply quote the full raw size of that block on their site, even though a meaningful chunk of those addresses were already flagged by major CDNs and block lists long before you ever sent a single request through them. The number printed on the page is technically true and practically useless to you at the exact same time. Mobile pools add an entire extra layer of noise on top of all that. Carrier-grade NAT means thousands of real live subscribers on an actual cell tower are sharing a small handful of public-facing IPs at any given moment, because that's simply how carrier networks are engineered to conserve address space. So what looks like an IP count on a mobile network is really much closer to a measurement of how often the carrier happens to rotate the visible address out from under those subscribers. It isn't a count of individual devices online at all. None of this makes the number a flat-out lie. Exactly. And I want to be fair about that. It's usually a real count of something that genuinely happened at some point in that provider's history. It just isn't a count of what you actually need to know before you commit a real monthly budget to it. And treating a lifetime count as an operational capacity number is exactly where a lot of buyers end up quietly burned. So if pool size isn't the number to lean on, what actually is? The first one worth asking about is concurrent live IPs, meaning how many exit nodes are genuinely online and passing real traffic in the last hour, not the last year of that provider's history. This is the number sitting closest to real usable capacity. A provider running an honest health monitoring system on their own network usually has this figure sitting in front of them already, because their own uptime depends on watching it too. The second number worth asking about is geographic and SN density, specifically in the place you actually need coverage. A pool of 50 million EPIs that's 90% concentrated across 3 countries does nothing for you if your target market sits somewhere else. Say you need Singapore or Malaysia and their supply is mostly sitting in the United States. Ask for a breakdown by country before you buy. And if you're buying mobile, ask for a breakdown by carrier too. A provider who talks about carrier-grade EPIs without naming a single carrier hasn't looked closely at their own supply. The third number is rotation behavior, and specifically how it behaves, not just whether rotation technically exists somewhere in the product. Does the pool rotate on every single request, on a fixed timer, or only when you manually trigger a refresh yourself? Fast, predictable rotation drawn from a smaller but genuinely healthy pool is often more useful for a scraper than slow rotation pulled from a huge but stale one, because rotation speed directly changes how much fingerprint exposure and rate limit history quietly builds up per session. The fourth number is the reputation of the specific EPIs that actually get assigned to your account, and this is the one providers almost never volunteer on their own. Picture an IP that's been hammering the same handful of e-commerce sites for months on end under someone else's account before it ever reaches you. That address carries history with those sites' detection systems, no matter how big the provider's pool claims to be. Pool size says absolutely nothing about whether the specific address routed to you today is fresh or whether it's already flagged from traffic that ran last month. There was a real stretch of time, not that long ago, where a genuinely bigger pool meant genuinely more headroom for a scraper, because most detection systems back then worked mostly off raw IP reputation and request volume counted per address. More addresses simply meant more room to spread requests around. That's just not where the industry sits anymore. That particular era, the one the marketing numbers were built for, is functionally over. Modern anti-bot systems, the kind running behind major retail platforms, travel booking sites, and social networks, weigh a whole stack of signals together, not just one. TLS and HTTP fingerprint consistency across requests. Browser automation artifacts left behind by the tooling itself. Request timing and pattern across a session. Cookie and session continuity over time. An IP reputation sits in there as just one input among all of that, not the whole picture the way it used to be treated. Here's what that looks like in practice. A provider can hand you 10 million EPIs, a genuinely enormous pool by any measure, and your scraper can still get blocked inside a single afternoon if every request rotates the IP but reuses the exact same TLS fingerprint, the same header order, and the same request cadence every single time, regardless of which address it's coming from. The detection system doesn't need to recognize the IP to catch you. It recognizes the pattern sitting behind it instead. Now flip that scenario around. A much smaller pool paired with careful session handling, realistic pacing, and one consistent browser fingerprint held for the length of a session can genuinely outperform a huge pool used carelessly. Pool size, in other words, is one single input into one part of a much bigger detection equation. And treating it as the whole story is exactly how people end up disappointed after paying premium pricing for the single biggest number they could find on a pricing page, only to watch their success rate sit stubbornly flat regardless of which provider they switch to. This is also exactly why I get suspicious the moment someone tells me their proxies are undetectable or completely unblockable. Full stop, no caveats. No provider on earth controls the fingerprinting, the timing, or the session logic happening inside your own scraper code. No provider can honestly promise an outcome that depends on decisions made on both ends of that connection, running against a detection system that neither side can fully see inside of. Anyone promising undetectable or risk-free without showing you a real test against a real target is selling you a feeling, not a fact. From the operator side of this, running a network I'd actually want to sell honestly. The pool metric I personally trust is concurrent healthy exits per target geography, checked against a live health probe, not some lifetime device count pulled from years of accumulated history. That number is almost always smaller than the marketing figure on the homepage, sometimes by an entire order of magnitude, and it should be. A provider willing to hand you that smaller honest number is telling you more about how carefully they run their operation than one who leads with the biggest lifetime count they can construct. If a provider won't give you concurrency figures when you ask directly, won't give you a real geographic breakdown, and won't give you a trial period long enough to actually test against your real targets before you commit to volume pricing, that reluctance is information on its own. It usually means the real operational number would look a lot less impressive sitting next to the marketing one, and somewhere inside that company, they already know it. So here's what I'd actually do before handing anyone money for volume pricing based on a big pool number. Ask for a trial, or at minimum a small paid test batch, before you commit to anything larger. Run that test directly against your real target sites, not some generic IP checker tool that just confirms a connection technically works. Watch your success rate, your block rate, and your latency across a realistic session length, not across one single lucky request that happens to sail through clean. Ask specifically for the concurrent live count in your actual target country, not the total network size printed on the homepage. Ask exactly how rotation gets triggered under the hood. None of this guarantees a clean run against every target you throw at it, and no honest proxy purchase can ever promise you that outcome. Full stop. What it does is replace a marketing number someone else wrote for you with real data you generated yourself against the actual thing you actually care about, which is the only data that ever really mattered here. The pool size printed on the pricing page is going to keep climbing every single year because it costs a provider absolutely nothing to just let that number grow quietly in the background. Your actual scraping success depends on a much narrower, much more specific slice of it than that headline suggests, and the only real way to know how big that slice actually is to go test it yourself. I run the proxies behind real scrapers myself, every day, and the full written guides plus the actual proxy setups I personally use are over at proxyscraping.org. Full written guides and tested proxy picks are at proxyscraping.org. So if this saved you from paying premium prices for a number instead of a working network, go ahead and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.